Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today, I'm very pleased. Joining me, Peadar Coyle. He's founder of AudioStack. As you know by now, I don't like to steal much of my guest time. I prefer to give it to them. So, Peadar, thank you first to be with me here today. Tell us a little more about you, your background, your journey, and tell me a little bit more about, why you started AudioStack. So, the floor is yours.
Cool. Thank you for having me. AudioStack is an AI native solution for audio production, so that's quite broad. But our customer base is largely media and entertainment companies and brands throughout the world. I have two co-founders, Bjorn and Timo, and three of us got together about nearly 7 years ago now to explore the impact of you know, synthetic voice and synthetic speech and synthetic music generation and various adjacent technologies and what that would have. So we started quite early with quite a technological focus. And myself, I'm a technologist. I was open source contributor to PyMC3, spent a lot of time in the Python ecosystem, spent a lot of time doing evangelism, but also working as a professional data engineer and data scientist. And lately, I've been delving quite a lot into AI agents and very excited about what that means for the future of software development. Seeing a lot of that in our own internal teams.
Great. Yeah. And thank you again, Peter. And, we're going to talk about AI a lot. And of course, what you're building. So, the way I love to do it with all founders or co founders that I host on the show, although, maybe I have the answer, but this is just to clarify a few things to the audience. So, back in the days, when you started your audio stack in 2019, right? So, what kind of problems in the audio production felt so broken that you thought it is worth to build something for this from scratch?
Sure, thanks for that. So I guess to go back to what kind of underlying problems there were, I think one thing is just time to value, right? So I remember even looking into this before I set up this company and the the time it takes to to get an ad produced or to get some audiobook produced or whatever, involves a lot of kind of manual processes. And I think also that um uh it's also quite interesting when you get things to a human level, and a human level kind of opens up new use cases and stuff like this. So that was kind of the underlying. I wouldn't call it a thesis because I don't think we were that sophisticated about it at the time, but that was kind of the underlying thoughts at the time.
Now, people often thinks that audio is a creative medium first and a technical one second. They go, how we you can help us, and when it was a moment for you to realize that actually audio production was a systems and infrastructure problem more than it's a creative medium.
Um, I still don't think it's. I think the creativity aspect is still very important. So we see that time and time again with our customers, the whole and even internally, there's a creative aspect to it. I think what and that I think is one of the things that doesn't go away. I think AI, you can automate tasks, but you can't automate human creativity and the ability to think through something quite end to end. Even subtle stuff what sounds would represent this brand better, and how do you get this kind of this message across, and that's when you're working with stuff like that, you're often working with creative teams, and that those kind of details are very important. What I think, what we realize is that just accelerating that time to value just allows people to experiment faster, and by experimenting faster, they can do things that are more personalized, or they can do things that are more localized. But also it just allows that allows kind of even an acceleration of creativity, because what we've seen is that there's kind of quite manual processes put an inherent bottleneck on the ability for people to to iterate faster. I think that's one of the things that I've seen across kind of. I think this is one of those meta trends about AI. I think AI is changing work, for all of us, but it's also like it's not getting rid of that kind of like, the things that you cannot be put into an algorithm. So I think that's, and that's taste, discretion, the ability to take risks, the ability to be creative. And I think that's,
Absolutely.
that's one thing, like, we see it time and time again. People go, "Oh my God, we could do this so much faster." So what does that mean now? And, "Oh no, we were thinking about this before, but we were inhibited by budget, time, whatever." That kind of like unlocks, kind of latent, abilities, that, and it's fundamentally empowering. So I think that's the part that gets most excited. That not this kind of dystopian viewpoint, but a very much a human empowering viewpoint. And I think that's ultimately the most exciting thing about what we are working on as part of a much wider set of entrepreneurs, academics, etc. Who are all trying to move the needle forward at the moment.
Perfect. Now, I always like and to hear it from a technologist like yourself, Peter. Like, if you want to describe to us a use case, right, like a real scenario where customer will benefit from what you're building. If you can, like, just and feel free to talk about it as much to describe it, like as I was telling you, there's no time limits here. So just because I want the audience to understand, like,
Sure.
how exactly you help them, and I know, like, for a fact, you shared this with me before, like even you have some use cases here in the UAE also as well. So if
Yeah.
you want to shed some light on that part, and maybe later I would follow up with some maybe deep dive questions.
Sure, that's no problem. Thank you. So one example that we have in the UAE, I'll just use that example, is a financial services provider, and they wanted to do, you know, uh, 3 ads a day with different security, so gold, Bitcoin, Tesla, etc. Um, and for each of the seven Emirates, right? So they wanted to do, good mornings,
Hmm.
good morning, Dubai, good morning, Abu Dhabi, etc., etc. And they wanted it to be all, different for each kind of like emirate, and a variant based on price data and stuff like this. So we linked up to their API. We pulled the price data. We pulled things like time of day. We produced hundreds of ads that went out in a localized format throughout the UAE. Which allowed them to tailor their message to a much more personalized experience, and also fundamentally drive downloads, which was the metric they cared about. But also, like, there's an element of novelty there. So the inhibiting factor was doing hundreds of these ads was too costly, too monotonous, and we just sort of like allowed them to unlock, but also an element of kind of creativity there by you know, them be able to, pull kind of live data that they weren't really able to do before. So that was that's kind of very much a UAE specific case. All the other cases, but I think it's the most exciting one for your listeners in the UAE.
That's awesome, Peter. Like, now, when you try to pull live market data, to trigger content generation, and of course, as you were mentioning, you need some time to specify it for different cities, cultures, and especially the UAE is interesting because like we have 200 plus nationalities, plus like the UAE itself, like uh, culture, it's diverse also as well. So where the from AI perspective of, like, let's me call it like audio generation perspective, and the data, where the complexity shows up, and any you know things to overcome these complexities, like whether it's by orchestration, automation, or maybe something else.
Yeah. So the question was, what challenges were there to be
Yes.
overcome? I
Yes.
think like a fundamental thing was, you know, having checks and balances to make sure the right things went out, and the systems were orchestrated correctly. We also had like fallbacks that we had to build into the system if if data didn't come through correctly. Um, there was a bit of like optimization to make sure that things happened in a fast enough period because latency is quite important there. Um, but I think like, and also just like a more just from a software point of view, I think there was a challenge going from like quite a rough proof of concept to a more robust solution that would work with hundreds of variants and allow us also the ability to do some sort of internal quality assurance because it's quite important that that didn't go wrong as such, because the media that you're producing at the end is actually the important output. So there was quite a lot of things like this that emerged, and that is that kind of what you're after for
Yeah,
that question?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now you mentioned something interesting, Peter, which is actually I was preparing to ask you about, like checking on the AI, right? So, um, how do you think about the observability of AI generated audio? Like how we can know, or what are like the measurements we can take to know like it's doing the right thing? And sorry to make it like a bit of loaded questions, because recently I'm discussing with a lot of CTOs and VP of engineering at different startups about keeping the human in the loop. So how much of automation is too much, and how much of also like keeping the human in the loop, it becomes like kind of a way of slowing you down, I would say,
Yeah,
like a bottleneck.
yeah. Um, I think the bottleneck is an interest. I think, like, frankly, I think a lot of this space is still new. Right. So, so I think that we're seeing the emergence of things like evals of like large language models is seems to be a relatively new term. And we're seeing the evolution of tooling and observability there. One thing that I think is interesting whenever you're looking at it is how use case specific some of those kind of like validations or scoring are. So like that feels like a lot like it's almost taking the human's discretion. 'Cause we have like a internal team who will do a lot of like internal QA both by listening to or observing some sort of metrics that they have. So some of that's automatable, but some of that's more taste specific. And I think there's and of course there's also things like using LLMs as judges and stuff like this, which can work on things like like around kind of like script generation. Um, but even that like has a fundamental stochastic aspect to it. So I think like I still, it feels still very early, and I think like I'm seeing the emergence of things like RAG pipelines. I'm seeing the emergence of like like better kind of like test data. Like there still feels like a need for kind of human in the loop. But I think that's where the kind of emergence of forward deployed engineers comes from. Because config can go wrong and deployments can go wrong, and there's an element of like also managing perceived risk on the customer side, and to make these systems work as well as possible. Um, I think we'll probably see some emergence of some kind of better standards over time, but I think we're still like figuring out a lot of the like there's no solution you go to that's a one click thing that observes everything, and we don't have like a well established kind of DevOps like kind of set of principles, kind of like Google kind of SLAs, like the kind of SRE book. I think we're still seeing the emergence of that. I think that's where like discretion, taste, and also like spending time with the domain experts to try to pull that into some sort of automatable solution in itself.
Right. Now, I'm gonna ask something, and by the way, because I've seen also in your background, you studied, I think, philosophy. Correct me if I'm wrong, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So it might look like a philosophical question. Now, I know you work on the from audio perspective, maybe on the media side of it, when I say like maybe generating ads, but when it comes to music maybe, and so there is a debate between people like about this and about like AI getting like even the voices. I remember there was a case where someone tried to sue because her voice was similar. Like when it comes to these things, Peter, like from a technologist and also from a human perspective, how do you think about it? The reason I'm asking you this, because I know also you want, as a technologist, as a CTO, you want also to get the best. At the same time, you have to put in mind like we need to do it in a way that people will accept it. How do you approach these controversies, if the word might be correct here?
Yeah, thanks for that. So I think um, my understanding of the question is like, how do you think about like trust and safety, and kind of in terms of AI technology?
And
I think
copywriting,
like,
little bit maybe.
sorry.
Copywriting.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, yeah. So fundamentally, copyright. So that's very much like vendor management, legal agreements with your suppliers, looking at things like data protection. I feel like a lot of that is relatively well established. In the past, also avoided certain vendors who we were a little bit concerned about their attitudes to these sort of things. So that's I think part of that providing a customer trust kind of thing. Um, there's also like an element of producing better guardrails, staying on top of like the different regulatory expectations, and also like customer demands like are getting more sophisticated. So like I'm seeing more in like kind of like procurement processes, more in depth discussion about like where data is stored, and how you audit these systems. And I think we're seeing the emergence of things like you know um like uh compliance standards for for AI systems in particular, like ISO 42001, in much the same way as I mean, we're SOC 2 compliant, but we also, that's very much a SaaS like compliance standard. Um, so I think you have to realize that you're a partner to customers, and if you're dealing with kind of like large media and entertainment companies, their IP portfolio is important in itself. So to do anything that would be somewhat shady would kind of invalidate that kind of relationship.
Great. I'm gonna shift gears a little bit,
Sure.
Peter, and ask you more about the engineering part of what you do. So you've spoken publicly about shipping fast and early. Now, at AudioStack, what does this mean in practice? Is it like code production? Is it customer value delivered, or is it something else?
So I interpreted that question about like the importance of shipping fast.
Yeah,
I think it's very important to like create a cadence, and also unblock that cadence, because sometimes that cadence can slow down. I think when that cadence slows down, we ship at least once a day. We ship several times a week. We have like a sprint demo session, every Friday, when people showcase what's being delivered. Well, we try to make that as customer facing and customer focused as possible. Sometimes some stuff is like infrastructure is a bit more detached, so it's not always perfect. But I think it's a very interesting question to ask. What happened? What? Why did this process slow down? And what often emerges is things like, oh, the CI/CD system is not sufficiently well developed, or the testing is harnesses are not built in there, so that people don't feel comfortable delivering, or there's some sort of fear about like because I think the ultimate fear I have is like, is code not shipped and building up? just fundamentally just builds up risks. That's why shipping small increments is so important. That's why shipping large PRs with lots and lots of like changes, fundamentally increase the risk that that you can have. And I think also like developers like to deliver value, right? So I think it's a very important kind of cadence that's important, and it's a very important part about being in a startup. And I think it's also one of the things that helps you retain talent and also attract talent from, shall I say it, slower moving organizations.
Excellent. Now, and if I want to think about that, Peter, from customer point of view for you as a CTO, because I know like you talk also a lot about customer obsession, right? Um, so how do you balance something that the customer might ask for, maybe a feature, and making sure that you deliver it fast, but at the same time it doesn't. I'm just giving an example, maybe it could be something else. Maybe building this feature fast would cause probably maybe kind of an imperfection, maybe a technical debt, maybe something else. So how do you balance these two when the requirements come?
Um, so I guess the question was about how do you balance, the need for quality with the need for speed.
Yes.
Um, I think sometimes it depends on, like everything. The answer is always it depends. Like it depends on like the kind of like the I guess the maturity of that feature set. So like some features are, and how how much impact they have throughout your wider software stack. Um, you know, some security features or permission features are examples of that. So those take a bit more planning, a bit more kind of rigor. For kind of smaller things, I think really looking at how do you produce the smallest increment of customer value while also where we also doing is we are kind of looping in our product teams to have a more holistic look at it, right? So not like customer asks for some sort of configuration, is that a wider set of problems, that affects a wider number of customers, or is this just like a kind of like a one, a custom build for one customer? And I think there's also an oscillation of that. Sometimes what appears to be custom for one customer becomes more impactful for others. So I think there's like a bit of just like managing that pendulum, and managing that risk, and also thinking of and trying as much as possible to think of things in like a more product mindset.
Great. I'm gonna ask you something maybe related more to leadership and culture now, Peter. In the age of AI, and when I say age of AI, I'm not here talking about the coding part of the things, more about the need for agility. Things can change very fast. So from your experience, and you've scaled teams before, and you're doing it, so how do you maintain the cultural behaviors, right? And what kind of cultural behaviors do you try to encode early, because that they would compound later? And I'm asking this maybe how you did it at AudioStack, and also maybe for someone who might benefit from, because the culture today is very, I would call it dynamic, because things are moving in a very fast pace. So, what's your take on this?
So I guess the question is, what's my take on cultural behaviors in the age of
Hmm.
AI when things are changing? I think like we often try to lean into curiosity. Like so I think curiosity as a value or behaviors around that in the interview process is quite important. I think there's a need to show an element of self motivation, the ability to handle things that might be that there is no playbook for, right? I think fundamentally, in a fast scaling company, the playbooks of old are kind of going out the way. And I think that's one of the more exciting things about go to market and coding and various other things. And there's a possibility that programmers' workflows in 5 years' time will be sufficiently different than programmers' workflows now. That things that people can learn in university is you know could become almost irrelevant. And there's a challenge of of how quickly can universities adapt to these kind of things. Like a number of things we do internally that I think help culturally is like we have like lunch and learns, like where people like share what they're doing. People pod like we have an AI Slack channel where people are saying, "Oh, this is what we did," with AI. People are sharing, things like agents.md files across teams where they can see, this is how we used, Claude Code or whatever. There we do some experimentation with like prompts, and the sharing of these things. We try to give like have kind of internal wikis where people can see, oh, this is what we use for this problem, and that applies not just in engineering but also kind of marketing. You had like really great success with like custom GPTs and kind of for like marketing content generation. So I think like just being open minded and like and just like trying things and like getting your hands dirty and being able to experiment, that I think like opens up like a range of kind of possible behaviors.
Great. And as a leader, Peter, like, and I'm asking, maybe this applies to you, and maybe I'm not sure if it's the same across the board. As a CTO, where nowadays in this age of AI, you feel like you need to spend most of your time on? Like, is it um architecture? Like, is it like people? Is it strategy? How AI have changed, not the core role, of course, of the CTO, but I mean the way a CTO would spend his or her day, usually.
I think one of the more interesting things about what AI means for like what leaders, I make it more general than just CTOs. I think this is engineering managers as well, is the ability to sort of like still be using kind of like AI agents to be delivering code. So I'm amazed at like one of the things I spent quite a bit of time on is actually really quite tactical remark here, which is like around like things like security fixes. Like, so can you use AI agents to automate security fixes? Security fixes are a kind of a long tail of, let's be honest, often not prioritized work. They're very, very hard to get up the roadmap. But with the kind of ability for like, bug reports to be generated and these kind of things to be generated, you know, in a kind of like semi-automated manner, that opens up the ability to sort of, be much more productive around things like that. I spent quite a lot of time on strategy and spending like kind of looking at what like new tools there are and kind of the ability to also like allow more generalists, right? So I think like I think one of the exciting things I've seen is how designers, product owners can, rather than just writing like a PRD or product review document, can build kind of a prototype to actually show oh no, this is what I want, which also allows like kind of like code artifacts to be shared, much more like liberally, and allow people to have a bit of a faster iteration period, or even more experimentation period as well. So I think, just what does AI mean for productivity more generally is kind of like the kind of meta question, and like that also impacts things like observability and reliability of these systems as well, because I think we're still figuring out a lot of that.
Just a follow up quickly on what you just mentioned, and this is something I didn't prepare for, honestly. Um, do you see I've seen, in some organizations, kind of they have unified the role of product and the technology, like CTO and CPO. So I've seen CTPOs or CPTOs, whatever you want to call them. Do you think because just of what you mentioned, we're gonna see more of this, like where product merge with the CTO, more than just having it, or because of the nature of how things are done in software. Usually, still we're gonna in majority see two, you know, different people handling each one of these.
I think it's still healthy to have two different people, but I do think there's like a broadening of some of these roles as such. Um, and even that just helps in terms of empathy of like,
Hmm.
understanding, this is what, this is how hard this would be to do, or having a bit more understanding of the kind of the friction. I think like technology often becomes a very kind of delivery focused role, and products more about like what is possible. And I think it's quite difficult to have those. Some people do, but I think it's quite difficult to have those things all in one person's head. Um, but I do think there's like a widening or kind of or change in the shape of those roles that I think is happening. So I think maybe in a couple of years we might be using some different acronyms.
Great. I gotta go back quickly because maybe we didn't talk about this to the AI and audio in general. Um, do you think, or let me ask you this way, AI is becoming mainstream, right? So, what would be the main difference between a great audio experience from a generic one in the future?
Okay. Um, I think there's still, so like the question is like what's everything a great audio experience in the future? I think to go back to the creativity aspect, I think like the details and the kind of nuances I think are always um very, very important. Um I think, there were there were questions about like kind of like synthetic voice, um like how good that was, and I think that feels like it's sort of hit a limit of acceptability, but I think there's still like levels of detail underneath that, and particularly around things like different languages and stuff like this, that these are always kind of like lagging factors, in terms of like the kind of march of technology. um yeah, that's kind of like the best I can answer to that off the top of my head. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great actually. Now, for builders, founders, CTOs in that space, what do you think they should be cautious about, or let's say they would be spending a lot of time on in the audio space, I would say, or anything creative, by the way. It might be, it might be video, it might be art, I don't know. Where do you think, the main focus for founders, CTOs would be, um, with all what's happening currently with AI?
Yeah, I think like, so the question is like what should be the focus of like founders building these kind of like, I'll just call it like creative media
Yes.
tech
Yes.
spaces, if you want. Sure, if you're looking for a kind of naming convention, I think it's quite easy to like hack together prototypes. I think it's quite difficult to build like robust, reliable systems. And I think like some of that's around questions like UX, like what is the design UX experience that a customer expects to be able to do something, at various levels of granularity, right? So that I think is a challenge in itself, both in terms of latency, both in terms of like, like even like how you represent various things, like, and that's like in the same way that building a text editor is still non-trivial, even though we have a lot of like kind of the functionality out there. um there's kind of questions of like, how do you integrate into other systems and add more value end to end. And then there's like, there's just questions of scale. So how do you do it when you're like constantly people are using it, it's growing, you have like multiple users in multiple countries around the world. How do you support them? How do you handle kind of like and how do you like get to the levels of like of management and configuration that they expect to be able to add to add value inside of a large organization. So I think that's kind of like the things that like that I think are the hard problems. And and I think fundamentally, building prototypes is easy, but it's like the last 10% of any software development is still hard, superbly hard.
That's very valuable. I can't agree more on this because I think it's all not only in software. I think in everything, I mean, because people, and this is my theory, we humans we like to take shortcuts, and we think like, but don't get me wrong, like AI is great getting you, the first few steps as you mentioned, but you need to put your human perfection, I think, at the end, and this will be the secret sauce, in my humble opinion, when it comes even to software products and anything that comes from AI, where we add the human touch on top of it. Now, as we are coming almost to an end, Peter, for today, and really I enjoyed the conversation. Any final things you want to share? Any final thoughts, and where people can get in touch and learn more?
You can check out our website at www.audiostack.ai, and I'm Peadar Coyle. I'm findable on LinkedIn. In terms of like final thoughts, um, I'm very excited about how the kind of progress in like large language models in general and the effect that's having on software development. I've been spending a lot of time playing with or experimenting with Cursor and Claude Code, and I encourage, if you're not enabling your teams to use them, you should definitely be doing that, and sort of be building your own codes of practice internally, because I think that's probably the level on top of that's harder than just the more kind of vibe coding area.
Sure. This is uh, great, I would say. Now, Peter, like for the links you mentioned, I will make the life easy for my audience. They will
Okay.
find in the show notes. If they are listening on their favorite podcasting app, and if you're watching this on YouTube, you can find in the description. Peter, I can't thank you enough for your time. I know how busy it can be. You said like you have your weekly Friday meetings, so I would not
Okay.
I would not take much time from you. Again, thank you very much for being here. And this is how I end my episodes. This is for the audience. If you just find us by luck, thank you for passing by. If you enjoyed, give me a favor, subscribe and share it with your friends and colleagues. And if you are one of the people who keeps coming again and again, thank you very much for your support, for loyalty, for making the CTO show with Mehmet even in 2026, similar to 2025. Like we are still ranking on the top 200 Apple podcast charts in different countries. Thank you very much for this. This cannot happen without your support. And thank you for tuning in. As I say always, stay tuned for a new episode very soon. Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay, bye.